the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way. That man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he's brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was trying to say. So Jesus again said to them, "Truly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. But I came that they may have life and have it more abundantly." There's some funny animals in our world. You ever seen this thing? It looks like it's been photoshopped. It looks like it can't possibly exist. It's taken the lips off of some, I don't know, the Hollywood icon from the 1950s and stuck them onto a flattish-looking fish. But it really does exist. This is the red-lipped batfish. And it's got a proper Cupid's bow-type mouth in bright red, right under the sea. Next one, Tom. Oh. I didn't invent this. This is the panda ant. How cute is that? You never thought you'd think an ant was cute, did you? But you mix an ant with a panda and all the cuteness descends upon the ant. Next one, Tom. The Venezuelan poodle moth. I think it's cute as a button. No. I wouldn't like it if it was flying around my lamp. But on a picture, it's cute as anything. It's got these sort of sticky up bits that make it look like poodle's ears. Yeah. So that's why it's called a poodle moth. Tiny little thing. Next one, Tom. Ooh. Now I think this looks like it's a baby and it'll grow into itself. And it'll get some hair eventually. But actually this is a fully grown, absolutely finished aye. Next one. The maned wolf. Now, what do you reckon that looks like? Looks like a deer? Or a donkey, yeah? Or maybe a fox, with the facial bit, maybe a fox. But it is actually, hey, how are you? It's actually a wolf. I mean, it just looks like, to me, it looks like a cross between a fox and a deer. But it's actually a wolf. Next one. The naked mole rat. What a thing. What a thing. Now, why do you not like it? Why are you saying yuck? This poor thing lives all its life in the dark. It lives in burrows under the ground. And because there's so many naked mole rats all grouping and clumping together, if it had fur, it would overheat and they would all die off. So they are naked. Permanently naked mole rats. It's not a diseased mole rat, it's a naked mole rat. Next up. The Yeti crab. This is the inspiration for all of those feather boas. The Yeti crab. It's called the Yeti crab, obviously, because it's got those great Yeti-like hairy arms on the front. You know a Yeti, don't you? Yeah, you know what a Yeti is. Yeah. Okay. All right, good. Next. Yoda under the sea. A blobfish. It really exists. It's genuinely true. And that is sitting on the bottom of the sea. It's sitting on a pile of sand, just sitting, the blobfish. Not the prettiest of all God's creatures, but weird. Next one. And then there's the sheep. Now, sheep really are funny animals. There's all sorts of things that are very strange about sheep. They are not the smartest creatures in the world in some ways. They will put their head down and start eating grass and just keep going, eating grass. They don't care where they're going, they're just following the grass. So if you wanted to get a sheep captured, put grass all the way into your trap and it'll just follow it. It'll just eat and follow, not watch where it's going. If one sheep runs, all the sheep run. Doesn't matter where that sheep's going, it might be going over a cliff. But all the other sheep will follow it because sheep are herding animals. And if one runs, they assume that there's something dangerous, so they all run after that sheep. Don't even ask, where are we going? You just carry on. All sorts of strange and unusual characteristics of sheep. But the sheep that we've started talking about today with Jesus in John chapter 10 are his sheep. And they have some pretty remarkable characteristics, one in particular that we'll come on to in just a minute. Jesus in John 10 is talking sheep. Now you've heard me say before that Balaam talked donkey. You remember that? Well, today Jesus is talking sheep. He's talking in a language that his sheep understands. He's using a voice that his sheep know. Now, just to put it into some context, Jesus is continuing talking at the same time and in the same place with the same people that he was talking to in John chapter 9. Now, we have a division of the chapters there, but actually the conversation just carried on. And so Jesus is talking to people who have just been through that process that we've already discussed like last couple of weeks of the man born blind. You remember the one where Jesus came along and spat on the ground and made the mud and put it in his eyes? That's the one. And then at the end of that, we said last week that the Pharisees questioned him. And then they brought him back and they questioned him again. Who did this? How did he do it? And the man said it was him over there and he did it by putting mud and so on. This conversation in John 10 is continuing from that, but why? What's the link between the healing of the man born blind and the characteristics in John 10 of a shepherd and his sheep? Well, the characteristics, take that back. The link is that when the Pharisees questioned the man born blind in John 9, what they said to him was, "You are following him, not Moses." So they threw him out. And we said at the end of our study last week that Jesus went to him and found him and brought him and added him to the company, to the fellowship, to the communion of his disciples. He went out and found that man who'd been thrown out of the synagogue. And being thrown out of the synagogue at this time was pretty drastic. It wasn't something to be taken lightly. If you were thrown out of the synagogue, you were persona non grata. It's like being a Muslim and becoming a Christian in some cultures today. You didn't only lose your faith community, you lost your family. They wouldn't talk to you. You lost your business because no one would go to it. You lost your ability to buy food because nobody would sell to you. I mean, you were really an outcast if you had been cast out of the synagogue. And that's what those Pharisees did to the man born blind. They said, "You're not following Moses anymore, you're following Jesus," and they threw him out. And we read earlier Ezekiel 34, but if you'd read the passage slightly before the bit where we picked it up, it talks about how poor shepherds, bad shepherds, evil shepherds, cheating shepherds, shepherds who only care about themselves, throw the sheep out. And so what Jesus was doing when he started talking in chapter 10 about shepherds was saying, "You've thrown this man out, you're bad shepherds, but there's a different kind of shepherd, and that's me. I'm a different kind of shepherd." So the reason why Jesus has gone from the man born blind to shepherds is because that man born blind had been subject to bad shepherds, wicked shepherds, by the definition of Ezekiel 34. And now Jesus is saying, but there are different shepherds, and I'm it. So he starts talking about sheep and sheepfolds, and being the door and being the shepherd. Well, it's kind of confusing if you take it all together, because how can you be the shepherd and be the door, and be the gate, and be this and be that? But what's happening here is Jesus explains things in two different ways. There are two different types of sheepfolds going on here. Thank you very much, Tom. You're getting used to this, aren't you? I'm very impressed. The first type of sheepfold is the communal sheepfold. And you usually found these in a town. What would happen is that the shepherds would take their sheep out onto the fields during the day, and then they'd bring them back to the safety of the town at night so that they were safe from thieves and bandits and wolves and all those things. They'd bring the flock of sheep back down, and they'd need somewhere to keep them in the town. So they would have a giant, big sheepfold where, Fred the shepherd would put his sheep, and then George the shepherd would bring his sheep, and they'd all go in together. And Martin the shepherd would bring his sheep, and so on and so forth. And they'd all put their sheep in this one big communal sheepfold. So that's the first one. The second one is the individual sheepfold. And this could be made of, we think of a sheep pen, don't we, with fences around it. But sometimes it could be a cave, perhaps, or an area that's surrounded on 2 or 3 sides and only has one side open, maybe hedges or different things. Any place where you could gather your sheep and there was a limited space for them to run out. That would be considered a sheepfold. Well, what's the difference between these two types of sheepfold? Well, this is the first one that Jesus talks about. He says there is a communal sheepfold. And in the characteristics of the communal sheepfold are first, the doorkeeper knows the shepherd. Okay, so there's someone that is in charge of all of these multiple flocks that are all gathered together. And the good shepherd is the one that comes there, and the guard who's looking after all these sheep, the doorkeeper, looks at him and he says, "Oh, I remember you. You brought yours in yesterday. That's fine. You can go in and get them out." All right? And that's important, because you don't want to go back and they won't let you in if your sheep are in there. But a good doorkeeper will know that shepherd has his sheep on the inside. So that's the first thing that is important about a shepherd in a communal sheepfold. The doorkeeper knows him. Second one is he knows his sheep by name. What would your sheep be? Sean the sheep, isn't it? That's the name. He knows his sheep by name. We find this probably quite difficult to understand. How can a shepherd know the names of his sheep? In England, mostly, we look at sheep and we think they all look the same. Don't we? There's an occasional one that has a spot somewhere, or 3 black legs and a green one, or whatever, I don't know. But different ways of recognising sheep are few and far between. And you have to be quite trained in the eye to be able to spot the difference between various sheep. But there are other cultures, and I know one story from Malawi, and I don't know other nations specifically, but I know that in Malawi, shepherds will take their sheep out, and they might lose one. And when they go looking for that sheep that's sort of run off on its own, they will go to their friends and their family around the place and say, "Do you know the sheep called Fred? Have you seen him? Do you know the sheep called Mary? Have you seen her?" It's unbelievable, isn't it? They don't call them Fred and Mary in Malawi, probably, but I don't know what they would call them, so I'm guessing. But it is a culture where everyone knows everybody's sheep. They don't have to put blue paint to, recognise the flock, or green spots or tags or whatever we have in England. In some of these cultures, they know them, and they know them as a community. And that's what Jesus was referring to, the fact that the sheep have a name and he knows it. Quite inconceivable to us. But the people that Jesus was talking to would be quite familiar with the idea of knowing a sheep's name if you were its shepherd. The next thing he says about this communal situation is the sheep know his voice and they follow him. And this is important if you have a communal sheepfold. Really, really important. Because you might have 30 sheep in your flock, but there might be 300 sheep in that sheepfold overnight. So how are you going to go through them and pull out yours? And that's mine, and that's mine, and that's mine. Do you know what they did? They opened the door, and the shepherd would stand there and say, or, come on guys, let's go. Whatever his particular call was, he would make that call, and 30 out of those 300 sheep would run out. And now this is what I mean by sheep being remarkable in some ways. In some ways, they're very, very stupid. In other ways, they're very, very smart. And they know the difference between every other voice and their shepherd's voice. There is a story told about Turkish soldiers in World War I in Palestine. These Turkish soldiers rolled up to a place where a man was sitting looking after his sheep, and they stole the sheep. They managed to get them away from him. And they were going further and further away down this particular valley, and the shepherd was just stood there realizing what was happening, but thinking, I'm powerless against a load of Turkish soldiers. They're armed. What can I do? So do you know what he did? He called the sheep, and the sheep came back. Oh. The Turkish soldiers couldn't do a thing about it. They couldn't stop the sheep from responding to the call of the shepherd's voice. Amazing. The sheep know his voice and they follow him. And the last thing about the communal shepherd is that he brings his sheep out. He doesn't leave them there in the sheepfold. He brings them out to be with him. Well, the second kind of sheepfold is the individual sheepfold. And this is very different. You needed very different characteristics, very different qualities to successfully have someone have a collection of sheep, a flock of sheep, in an individual sheepfold. In this one, Jesus says something very different. He doesn't talk about the sheep knowing his voice and all of those things that he needed those qualities he needed to have for the communal sheepfold. In this one, he's in an individual sheepfold. He's out on a hill or a mountain or somewhere out in the wilds, and it's just the sheep and the shepherd, and that's it. Nobody else around, at least nobody with good intentions else around. And in this situation, Jesus says, I am the door, or I am the gate. And what does that mean? Well, it means that when you put your sheep in an individual sheepfold, you have just the last bit of the gap left. Do you know what the shepherd does? He lies down. Go on, Jean. He lies down and sleeps. And he becomes the gate. It becomes the only thing. His body, physically laid down, is the only thing that stops the sheep from running out. Oh, wow. The preachers among you know where I'm going to be going with this fairly soon. The other thing about the individual sheepfold is that the shepherd leads his sheep in and out. This is a constant toing and froing. This is more common. This is more frequent, the in and out movement of sheep back and forth to the sheepfold, out to graze, to the sheepfold, out to graze. This is the relationship that's described in Ezekiel 34 that we read earlier. This is the abundant life. This is the showers of blessing. This is the time when you will be led out to pasture and you will be given rich food to graze on. This is the place where the shepherd tends and looks after the sheep. It's the going out and the coming in, the going out and the coming in, the daily existence of life. Next thing is that the shepherd keeps his sheep safe from thieves and robbers, because they're out in the middle of nowhere. Anyone could potentially come in, but the shepherd keeps the sheep safe. Owen had an experience of this week, didn't you, Owen? Kept safe in the midst of thieves and robbers, or idiots anyway. Yeah, well done, bravo. And the last thing he says is that I will give these sheep life, and abundant life, life in all its fullness. So, which are we? Are we in the communal sheepfolds, or are we in the individual sheepfold? Well, the answer is both. It's a kind of complex metaphor, or at least it's two metaphors sort of looking like they're one metaphor. And it can get quite complicated if you're not familiar with the background. So you know the background now. We're talking about two different sheepfolds. But we need to be responsive to Jesus, to our shepherd, whichever circumstance we find ourselves in. He says, I give them abundant life. You know, some of us think about abundant life and we think, I haven't got that. It's hard. Some of us are in a lot of pain sometimes. Some of us have trouble with our eyes and our ears and our faculties and our physical bodies and various things at different times. Some of us struggle financially. Some of us struggle emotionally. We've got emotional baggage from the past, or problems and stresses and strifes and challenges at work, perhaps. Things that we're dealing with every single day, or at school. Some of us are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's starting to get heavy, isn't it, Rach? Yeah. Life doesn't always seem like a bed of roses. We don't always feel as if we're out, eating in the green pastures. Sometimes it feels like we're scrubbing around in the rocky places and trying to find just enough to survive. But you know what? Oops. If we feel bad now with Christ, we need to think, how would we have felt without Christ? God does give us abundance. He gives us abundance because he never deserts us, because he never lets us go. He never stops providing for us. The Bible talks, doesn't it, about you may grieve, but you do not grieve like those who have no hope. This is the answer. There will be difficult times, but they're not difficult times that you have to face alone. There may be times when finances are not quite so abundant and you struggle a little bit maybe, but you have resources in Christ. We have recourse constantly to prayer. We have recourse constantly. I love when you're talking about provision, God's provision. I love that place where it says that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. I love that bit. And in this context, I like to think of it as God owning the sheep on 1,000 hills as well. Because it means that if you own cattle, it means that you're a rich man, that you're abundantly provided. That is your source of wealth. It's like having 1,000 bank accounts full of money. It's like, and all of that is available, belongs to your Father. That is your inheritance. So when things are difficult, when things are tight financially, we say, Lord, you said you would provide everything that I need. Not according to my ability to provide it, but according to your riches in glory. The abundance that God provides is according to his riches, not according to our perception of what God can provide for him. Sometimes provision is completely beyond our comprehension. There have been times when I've been really that close to destitute, that close. And there's almost no distance between my thumb and my finger there. It's really, really close. But every time I've been in that situation, God has provided. Financially, yes. But when finances were not enough, God has provided. Do you remember I told you that story probably 100 times now about being in the Philippines and the rice being replenished over and over and over again? I had money in the bank, but the money in the bank was no good because all the bridges were down and I couldn't get to the bank. Don't even think, why didn't you use your cash card? I was in the middle of the Philippines. And they don't have them there. But God, in that situation, just shifted all the rules away. He didn't provide money, he provided rice. 9 cups a day, 3 times a day. 9 cups, 3 times a day. For 9 days, until the bridges reopened and I could get to the bank. And then it suddenly stopped. If God provides for his people one way or another, we need to call on him. When we need a friend, what a friend we have in Jesus. When we're struggling with grief, we do not grieve as those with no hope. God has provided abundance for his sheep. But let's go back very briefly to that statement that he made at the beginning of the second sheepfold metaphor. He said, I am the door. I am the gate. The first thing that was important about this was that Jesus was not there to keep sheep out. He was not the gate that keeps sheep out. We need, don't we, to be open to new sheep coming in. Sometimes people get to the point where they think, I like it as it is, let's stay here. Nobody else is coming now, let's hold off now. Got too many new people, that's it. Don't want any more new people. But you know what? The gate is not there to keep people out. There is a story told about a man who was a bit down on his luck, and he was a bit dirty and a bit raggedy looking. And he was a bit smelly because he didn't have anywhere to live and he hadn't had a shower for a while. And he came into a church and he sat in the church, and someone in the church came up to him and said, would you mind moving towards the back? You're not looking quite the way we like people to look in this church. Do you move towards the back? And then eventually, as the smell dissipated and extended around him and the cloud of odour grew, they went to him and said, would you mind sitting outside? Because you don't smell quite the way we like people to smell in this church. So he got up and went outside, didn't want to offend anyone. And when he got outside, there was another chap sitting on the wall just out the front of the church. And this man sat down with the gentleman that was outside the church, and they started chatting. And the one that had been thrown out, he said, I would have liked to have gone to church today, but I'm not really looking so good. And I'm not really smelling so good. And I do understand that they don't want me in there, but I would have liked to have gone to church today. And the chap that he was talking to said to him, you know, I'm a bit smelly and I'm a bit dirty. It's because I'm a carpenter and I've been trying to get into that church for years. Ooh, ooh, ow. We need to make room in the church for anybody and everybody who wants to be in the church. Are we a church where anything goes? Pretty much. In terms of being open to who comes here, anything goes. Anything goes. If you want Jesus, we want you. That's how it is. If you want Jesus, we want you. In the individual sheepfold, most sides are surrounded by various barriers. But there is one door. not a door to keep people out, but a door to bring people in, a door to make the way for people to become the sheep that God has called them to be. And so the shepherd lays himself down across the door of the sheepfold. And Jesus said, I've come to give them life. How did Jesus come to give us life? By laying down his life for us. It is in the laying down of his life that Jesus made it possible for the door to be opened so that the sheep could come in to his fold. That's what Jesus was saying here. He was saying, that man born blind has been thrown out and excluded by everybody in the establishment, everybody in the synagogue, all the Pharisees. Nobody wants him anymore, but I want him. Not only do I have a sheepfold, I'm going to make myself be the door that opens and brings him in to the sheepfold. And when he's in, I will provide for him. When he's in, I will know him personally by name. When he's in, he will know my voice and he will respond to me. When I call, he will go. When I call, he will not ignore me, but he'll get up and say, yes, I'm going to do that, whatever God has told me to do. You know, refer to this thing down here, the farthings display time and time again. Those people sat in the pews that you are sitting in. They went to China. They laid the foundation of a fabulous work in a certain part of China before they were killed for their faith. Tremendous story. They sat in the pews that you're sitting in. There was no difference between them and you. If God calls you, what would your response be? Their response was to get up and go off to China. God called you to do something. God calls you to run a ministry here in Scarborough. God calls you to do a certain thing within the church, like Dave. Dave responded, no hesitation. He's regretting it now, right? But when we needed a treasurer, Dave stepped up to the plate. Within seconds, yes, I'll do it. What about you? What's your place? What's your ministry? When God calls, what's your response? Will you get up and follow him? Or will you say, no, not for me? Well, the question is, it depends whether you know Jesus. If you know him, he's your shepherd, you hear his voice, it's programmed into you to follow him. Sheep are remarkable. They're stupid sometimes, but they know the shepherd's call. They know the shepherd's call. Do you know the shepherd's call? Start listening for his voice. Start asking him what he would have you do for him. Those of you that are being baptized, you're following after him. Those of you that have become members and officers within the church, you're following him. But what's next? There's always something more. What do I do next? What's the next plan? When God calls, if you're a sheep, respond to his voice. We're going to finish our service today with a hymn that's taken from John 10:10, more abundantly. And I have to play it because I couldn't find it anywhere online. So we're going to stand and we're going to sing, Are You Trusting Jesus All Along the Way?